Hey guys, tonight let's slow everything down. Dim the lights, put the phone face down, loosen your jaw, and let your brain gently power off while we drift back about 4,500 years to ancient Egypt. Because nothing says bedtime relaxation like limestone blocks, divine kings with ego problems, and a civilization that decided the best use of its time and resources was building giant triangles in the desert. So tonight, we're talking about the secrets of the ancient Egyptian pyramids. Not aliens, not laser beams, just humans. Very organized, very exhausted humans doing this whole thing the hard way. Picture it. The Nile gently flooding, palm trees swaying, and somewhere in the distance, a guy named Khufu is standing on a hill, squinting at the horizon, and saying something like, "Yeah, bigger, make it bigger." And everyone around him is nodding, because he's a god, obviously. Ancient Egypt, like many ancient societies, had one core belief that shaped literally everything they did. Death was not the end. It was just paperwork. Lots of paperwork. Your soul had to pass tests. Your heart got weighed. Your organs needed to be stored in jars with weird animal lids. And most importantly, your body had to stay intact forever. No pressure. So the Egyptians became extremely serious about tombs. Not nice little resting place tombs, more like eternal cosmic storage facility that screams, "I mattered" tombs. Early on, pharaohs were buried in mastabas, low, flat, rectangular structures, basically ancient Egypt's version of starter tomb. But then someone, probably an architect who hadn't slept in weeks, had an idea. "What if," he said, rubbing his temples, "we stacked them?" And just like that, we got the step pyramid of Djoser. Djoser was an early pharaoh, and by early, we mean Old Kingdom early. This was Egypt before things got really fancy, but also before anyone learned to stop overachieving. Djoser's pyramid wasn't smooth. It looked like a wedding cake made of stone, 6 stacked layers, each one slightly smaller than the last, and everyone lost their minds over it. Because now, instead of a flat tomb, the pharaoh had a monument that reached toward the sky, symbolically climbing toward the gods. Also extremely visible from very far away, which was kind of the point. Djoser loved it. Future pharaohs looked at it and said, "Okay, but what if we made it smoother and taller and somehow more stressful?" Enter Sneferu. Sneferu is one of those historical figures who doesn't get enough credit for sheer persistence. He was a pharaoh with ambition, and unfortunately a habit of learning by trial and error. Sneferu built 3 pyramids, not because he wanted 3, but because the first 2 didn't quite work. The first one, the Medum pyramid, started off as a step pyramid. Then they tried to smooth it out. Then it collapsed, which must have been an awkward moment. Imagine being the architect, standing there, watching your pyramid slide into itself like a tired souffle. Sneferu didn't punish anyone. He just nodded slowly and said, "Okay, let's try again." So they built the bent pyramid. And if you've ever seen it, you know why it's called that. Halfway up, the angle suddenly changes. It goes from steep to noticeably less confident. This wasn't an artistic choice. This was panic. The builders realized the structure was unstable. Cracks were forming. Gravity was doing what gravity does. So they adjusted the angle mid-construction, and technically it worked. The bent pyramid still stands today, leaning slightly like it's embarrassed. Sneferu finally nailed it with his third attempt, the red pyramid. Smooth sides, stable structure, a true pyramid. By this point, Sneferu had basically invented the final blueprint, and his son Khufu was ready to absolutely abuse it. Khufu is the pharaoh behind the Great Pyramid of Giza. You know, that one. the largest pyramid ever built, originally about 481 feet tall, made of roughly 2.3 million stone blocks, each weighing anywhere from 2 to 15 tons, because subtlety was not the goal. Khufu ruled Egypt like a god, because in Egypt, pharaohs weren't just kings, they were divine intermediaries, living gods on earth, which meant questioning their decisions was not encouraged. Khufu decided he wanted a pyramid that would last forever, and by forever, he meant longer than anyone else's pyramid, especially his dad's. Construction likely took around 20 to 25 years, which means most of the people who started building it did not live to see it finished. Fun. Contrary to popular belief, the pyramids were not built by slaves. They were built by paid laborers, skilled workers, farmers during flood season. This is sometimes presented as a comforting fact, but let's be honest, paid in ancient Egypt mostly meant bread, beer, and not being executed. Workers lived in nearby villages, they ate well, they had medical care, and they worked under brutal conditions, dragging massive stones across the desert using sledges, ropes, and sheer human stubbornness. No wheels, no cranes, no shortcuts, just vibes and muscle. And somehow they did it. The stones were quarried, transported, and placed with astonishing precision. The base of the Great Pyramid is almost perfectly level. Its sides align closely with the cardinal directions. Even modern engineers look at it and say things like, okay, that's annoying. Inside the pyramid, things get quieter, darker, more confusing. There are narrow passageways, ascending corridors, descending shafts. The king's chamber sits near the center, built entirely of granite. Above it, 5 relieving chambers stacked like stone pancakes, designed to redistribute weight so the ceiling wouldn't collapse. Which again means they were thinking about this very carefully. Khufu's sarcophagus is plain, no inscriptions, no decorations, and his body is gone. By the time archaeologists entered the pyramid in later centuries, it had already been looted, because no matter how big your tomb is, someone eventually finds a way in. This is one of the great ironies of the pyramids, built to protect the pharaoh forever, and yet almost every one was robbed. Still, the monument itself did its job. Khufu's name survived, his pyramid dominated the landscape, and thousands of years later, we're still talking about him. Which, honestly, was probably the real goal. Around the Great Pyramid, smaller pyramids rose, for queens, for family members, and nearby, the Great Sphinx stared silently across the plateau. Half lion, half king, all judgment. The Sphinx is believed to represent Khafre, Khufu's son, another pharaoh, another pyramid builder. Because once this trend started, there was no stopping it. Khafre built the second largest pyramid at Giza, slightly smaller than his father's, though placed on higher ground so it looks taller, which is such a sibling move. Khafre's causeway connected his pyramid to a valley temple near the Nile, a processional path for the king's body, because even in death, presentation mattered. His pyramid complex also included the Sphinx, which has spent most of its existence slowly being buried by sand, then uncovered, then buried again, like it's trying to sleep. After Khafre came Menkaure, the third pyramid builder at Giza. His pyramid is noticeably smaller, not because he lacked ambition, but because by this point, Egypt's resources were stretched thin. Also, honestly, 3 massive pyramids is probably enough. Menkaure's pyramid used granite casing at the base, luxurious, expensive, heavy. He died before it was finished, and his successors completed it using mud brick, which is a downgrade. After Giza, pyramid building continued, but things changed. Pyramids became smaller, less precise, more modest. Power shifted, resources dwindled, and eventually pharaohs stopped building pyramids altogether. Later rulers preferred hidden tombs, rock-cut chambers in the Valley of the Kings, less flashy, harder to rob, which, to be fair, worked slightly better. But the pyramids remained, silent, massive, unbothered. They watched empires rise and fall. They watched religions change. They watched people argue endlessly about how they were built. And they did not care. They were never meant for us. They were meant for eternity. So, as we gently drift onward, let's leave the Giza Plateau for now. The wind brushing across stone, the sun sinking low, and the pyramids doing what they've always done, standing there, waiting, not saying a word. Let's float forward, deeper into the secrets that followed these monuments. All right. Settle back in. Let your shoulders drop a little more. The pyramids are still behind us, glowing faintly in the moonlight, but now we're drifting inward, away from the stone, and into the reason all of this happened in the first place. Because the pyramids weren't really about architecture, they were about anxiety. Specifically, anxiety about dying wrong. Ancient Egyptians believed the human soul was complicated. Not just one soul, several. There was the Ka, your life force, basically the version of you that still needed snacks after death. There was the Ba, your personality, the part of you that could leave the tomb, fly around, and then come back, because apparently, even in the afterlife, people liked options. And then there was the Ak, the blessed spirit, the final, glowing, upgraded version of you, if everything went according to plan. And this is where things got stressful. Because for all of that to work, your body had to stay intact, your name had to be remembered, your tomb had to survive, and your heart had to pass a test. No pressure. When an Egyptian died, their soul began a journey through the afterlife. Eventually, they stood before Osiris, god of the dead, and their heart was weighed against the feather of Ma'at, truth, balance, cosmic order. If your heart was heavier than the feather, that meant you were a moral disaster, and your punishment was not fire, not eternal torment, just being eaten by a creature called Amet, part crocodile, part lion, part hippo. Basically, the worst parts of everything. If Amet ate your heart, that was it. No afterlife, no eternity, just done. So, Egyptians became very concerned with preparation. They wrote spells, they memorized prayers, they included little cheat sheets in tombs. These are what we call the pyramid texts. The pyramid texts are some of the oldest religious writings in the world, carved into the inner walls of pyramids during the 5th and 6th dynasties. They weren't meant to be read by the living. They were instructions, directions, a cosmic GPS for dead kings. They included spells to help the pharaoh climb into the sky, to join the sun god Ra, to avoid being confused, delayed, or attacked by hostile afterlife creatures, which implies the afterlife was considered kind of dangerous. Later, these texts evolved into the coffin texts, and eventually the Book of the Dead, which was neither a book nor about death, but titles were loose back then. The Book of the Dead was customizable. Wealthy Egyptians could commission their own versions, complete with illustrations and specific spells they felt were necessary. It's very just in case. Now let's talk about mummification, because this is where things get hands-on. When a pharaoh died, embalmers got to work almost immediately. The process took about 70 days. First, the brain had to go. They removed it through the nose, with a hook. They didn't think the brain was important. They thought it was just filler. The heart, however, stayed. because that's where intelligence and morality lived, also because it was needed for the weighing ceremony. Then the internal organs were removed: lungs, liver, stomach, intestines. Each one was carefully preserved and placed into a canopic jar. These jars had lids shaped like the heads of the 4 sons of Horus. One had a human head, one had a baboon, one a jackal, one a falcon. Very normal, very calm. Each organ had its own god, its own job, its own role in the afterlife. Meanwhile, the body was wrapped layer after layer of linen, amulets placed between wrappings, spells spoken aloud. The whole process was ritualistic, precise, repetitive, because if you messed this up, the consequences were eternal. For pharaohs, this process was lavish, expensive, obsessive. Which brings us back to the pyramids. Inside these massive stone structures were burial chambers designed not just to hold a body, but to support an entire afterlife economy. Food offerings, furniture, jewelry, weapons, statues, and most importantly, shabti. Shabti were small figurines placed in tombs. They represented servants, because in the afterlife, work still existed, fields still needed tending, canals still needed digging, and the pharaoh was absolutely not doing that. So the shabti would match. All right, settle back in. Let your shoulders drop a little more. The pyramids are still behind us, glowing faintly in the moonlight, but now we're drifting inward, away from the stone, and into the reason all of this happened in the first place. Because the pyramids weren't really about architecture, they were about anxiety. Specifically, anxiety about dying wrong. Ancient Egyptians believed the human soul was complicated. Not just one soul, several. There was the Ka, your life force, basically the version of you that still needed snacks after death. There was the Ba, your personality, the part of you that could leave the tomb, fly around and then come back, because apparently even in the afterlife, people liked options. And then there was the Ak, the blessed spirit, the final, glowing, upgraded version of you, if everything went according to plan. And this is where things got stressful, because for all of that to work, your body had to stay intact, your name had to be remembered, your tomb had to survive, and your heart had to pass a test. No pressure. When an Egyptian died, their soul began a journey through the afterlife. Eventually, they stood before Osiris, god of the dead, and their heart was weighed against the feather of Ma'at, truth, balance, cosmic order. If your heart was heavier than the feather, that meant you were a moral disaster, and your punishment was not fire, not eternal torment, just being eaten by a creature called Amet, part crocodile, part lion, part hippo. Basically, the worst parts of everything. If Amet ate your heart, that was it. No afterlife, no eternity, just done. So Egyptians became very concerned with preparation. They wrote spells, they memorized prayers, they included little cheat sheets in tombs. These are what we call the pyramid texts. The pyramid texts are some of the oldest religious writings in the world, carved into the inner walls of pyramids during the 5th and 6th dynasties. They weren't meant to be read by the living. They were instructions, directions, a cosmic GPS for dead kings. They included spells to help the pharaoh climb into the sky, to join the sun god Ra, to avoid being confused, delayed, or attacked by hostile afterlife creatures, which implies the afterlife was considered kind of dangerous. Later, these texts evolved into the coffin texts, and eventually the Book of the Dead, which was neither a book nor about death, but titles were loose back then. The Book of the Dead was customizable. Wealthy Egyptians could commission their own versions, complete with illustrations and specific spells they felt were necessary. It's very just in case. Now let's talk about mummification, because this is where things get hands-on. When a pharaoh died, embalmers got to work almost immediately. The process took about 70 days. First, the brain had to go. They removed it through the nose, with a hook. They didn't think the brain was important. They thought it was just filler. The heart, however, stayed, because that's where intelligence and morality lived, also because it was needed for the weighing ceremony. Then the internal organs were removed: lungs, liver, stomach, intestines. Each one was carefully preserved and placed into a canopic jar. These jars had lids shaped like the heads of the 4 sons of Horus. One had a human head, one had a baboon, one a jackal, one a falcon. Very normal, very calm. Each organ had its own god, its own... All right, we're still drifting, no rush. The night air is warm, the desert is quiet, and the pyramids are doing what they do best: nothing. Because once the old kingdom faded and the last stone was set, the pyramids entered a very long phase of being there. For centuries, then millennia, they just sat, watching history happen without participating. And a lot happened. Empires rose around them, collapsed, rose again. New gods showed up. Old gods got awkwardly sidelined, but the pyramids remained stubbornly uninterested. By the time of the New Kingdom, Egypt's political center had shifted south. Pharaohs were buried in hidden rock-cut tombs. The Valley of the Kings became the new hotspot. And the pyramids? They were already old. Ancient Egyptians visiting Giza during the New Kingdom would have seen the pyramids the way we see Roman ruins: ancient, impressive, a little mysterious. Some even left graffiti, which is comforting. There are inscriptions left by workers, travelers, and tourists from thousands of years ago, saying things like, "I visited this place," or "I came here with my brother." Not exactly poetic, but deeply human. The Great Pyramid, once smooth and gleaming, slowly lost its casing stones. Earthquakes loosened them. People removed them. Cairo grew nearby. Stone was useful. Those pristine limestone blocks were repurposed into mosques, palaces, walls, which means parts of medieval Cairo are technically wearing bits of Khufu's pyramid. Recycling, but make it imperial. The Sphinx had an even rougher time. Sand buried it repeatedly. Only the head stayed visible for long stretches of history. There are records from ancient times describing efforts to dig it out, including by Pharaoh Thutmose IV, who claimed the Sphinx spoke to him in a dream. It promised him kingship if he cleared away the sand, which he did, and then he became pharaoh. So, dream achieved. Later, the sand came back. It always does. As centuries passed, Greek travelers arrived. Herodotus, the famous Greek historian, visited Egypt in the 5th century BCE. He wrote about the pyramids, He described their size, their construction. He also got a lot wrong. Herodotus relied on local guides, and local guides, like guides everywhere, occasionally made things up. He claimed the pyramids were built by slaves, that hundreds of thousands of people worked on them. Modern archaeology has gently corrected this, but his writing shaped Western imagination for centuries. By the Roman period, Egypt was a province. The pyramids became tourist attractions. Roman elites visited them, wrote poems about them, carved their names into stone, because humans have always been like this. Then Christianity spread. Then Islam. Egypt's religious landscape transformed completely. The pyramids, once sacred monuments, became curiosities. Some medieval writers thought they were Joseph's granaries from the Bible. Others thought they contained secret knowledge, lost sciences, magic. There were legends of hidden chambers filled with ancient wisdom, or cursed treasures, or both. Occasionally, someone decided to check. In the 9th century, the Abbasid Caliph al-Mamun ordered a tunnel dug into the Great Pyramid, not because he knew where the entrance was, but because he didn't. So his workers just dug. They hammered through solid limestone, hoping to find treasure. Eventually, they stumbled into one of the internal passageways. Inside, they found nothing. No gold, no scrolls, no secret knowledge. Just empty chambers, which must have been a letdown. Al-Mamun's tunnel is still there today, a reminder that curiosity and disappointment are eternal. For centuries after that, the pyramids faded in and out of attention. They appeared in travel accounts, in myths, in marginal notes. Then Europe rediscovered Egypt, which is a funny way of saying Europeans showed up and acted surprised that it was still there. The 18th and 19th centuries brought Napoleon, scholars, artists, and archaeologists. Napoleon's expedition to Egypt wasn't just military. It included scientists and engineers. They measured the pyramids, sketched them, documented them. Napoleon allegedly told his soldiers, "From the heights of these pyramids, 40 centuries look down on us," which sounds cool and may or may not have actually happened, but the vibe was correct. This period sparked Egyptomania. Suddenly, pyramids were everywhere in European imagination: architecture, art, literature. People started asking questions, serious ones. How were they built? What was inside? What did they mean? Archaeology became more systematic, less treasure hunting, more documentation. Still, a lot of damage was done. Explorers broke into tombs, removed artifacts, shipped them off to museums far away. Mummies were unwrapped at parties, because apparently that was entertainment. Not great. By the 20th century, archaeology improved. Excavations became more careful. Worker villages near Giza were discovered. Tools, inscriptions, evidence of organized labor. This helped dismantle the slave myth. It showed the pyramids as national projects, massive efforts coordinated by the state. Still impressive, still intense, but less cartoonishly evil. Modern technology added new layers of understanding: infrared scans, muon tomography, robotics. Scientists began peering inside the pyramids without destroying them. They discovered hidden voids, unknown chambers, not treasure rooms, just spaces, which somehow made them even more mysterious. The pyramids, it turns out, are not fully understood, and probably never will be. Not because of aliens, but because ancient humans didn't leave instruction manuals, and also because time erases things. What we do know is that the pyramids were not isolated. They were part of vast complexes: temples, causeways, boat pits. Khufu's pyramid had full-sized ships buried nearby, disassembled wooden boats, because even in the afterlife, travel plans mattered. One of these boats was reconstructed. It's astonishing. Over 140 feet long, perfectly preserved. It probably symbolized the solar bark, the vessel Ra used to cross the sky. The king would join the sun god, sail with him eternally. Again, very organized. As time passed, the pyramids became symbols of power, of mystery, of lost greatness. They were used to justify theories, conspiracies, spiritual movements. Everyone wanted them to mean something extra. But sometimes the simplest explanation is the quietest. They were built by humans, for humans, who believed very deeply in what they were doing and who could not imagine a world where their monuments would be ruins. So now, as we drift into the late night, the pyramids stand as they always have, weathered, massive, still. They've been sacred, ignored, misunderstood, obsessed over, and through it all, they remain. In the next stretch of our slow journey, we'll gently explore the lesser-known pyramids, the forgotten ones, the half-collapsed experiments scattered across Egypt, because Giza gets all the attention, but it was never alone. Let's wander onward. All right, still here, still drifting. The stars above Egypt haven't moved much, and neither have the pyramids. But now we're leaving Giza behind. Because Giza is just the headline act, the flashy trio everyone remembers. The rest of Egypt is dotted with pyramids that don't make it onto postcards. The experimental ones, the crumbling ones, the ones that tried their best. Let's ease into Dashur. Dashur sits south of Giza, and it's where things got awkward. We've already met Sneferu here, nervously adjusting angles and learning physics the hard way. But Dashur didn't stop being important after him. It became a kind of pyramid testing ground. The red pyramid still stands proudly, low, wide, stable. It looks calm, confident. The bent pyramid nearby does not. Its sudden change in slope is a permanent reminder of trial and error, a stone shrug. Inside, its corridors feel strange. 2 entrances, multiple chambers. It's like the builders weren't quite sure how this was supposed to work yet. And that's because they weren't. Pyramid construction wasn't handed down from the gods fully formed. It was invented, adjusted, corrected. Every pyramid taught the next generation something new. Move north to Abusir. Here, pyramids start to look tired. Built during the 5th dynasty, they're smaller, less precise. Their cores were made of rubble and mud brick, with thin limestone casing. Cheaper, faster, and now mostly gone. These pyramids collapsed over time. Their insides slumped, their outer shells peeled away. Today, they look like low, jagged hills, which is not ideal for eternity. But the belief system was still strong. The sun god Ra was now dominant. Pyramids were aligned with solar temples. The king's afterlife journey focused more on joining the sun than ascending to the stars. Religion evolved. Architecture followed. Now let's drift further south to Saqqara. Saqqara is a massive necropolis. It was used for thousands of years. This is where Djoser's step pyramid stands. Still impressive, still weird. Around it are smaller pyramids from later periods. Most are badly damaged. Some are barely recognizable. The 6th dynasty pyramids here include those of Unis and Teti. Their true legacy isn't their size, it's the writing. Unis's pyramid contains the earliest known pyramid texts, carved directly into the walls. Spells, prayers, instructions. Because by this point, people realized something important. Stone lasts. Words last. The architecture was shrinking, but the theology was expanding. By the end of the Old Kingdom, things fell apart. Central authority collapsed, regional governors gained power, resources dried up. The first intermediate period followed. It was chaotic, fragmented, and not great for pyramid maintenance. When Egypt reunited during the Middle Kingdom, pyramid building returned. Sort of. Middle Kingdom pyramids were built, but with compromises. They often had stone outer shells, but mud brick cores. They looked impressive at first, but time was not kind. The Pyramid of Amenemhat III at Hawara, for example, was part of a massive complex called the Labyrinth. Ancient writers were obsessed with it. They described endless halls and chambers. Today, almost nothing remains. Mud brick does that. These later pyramids also included increasingly complex internal layouts, traps, false passages, because tomb robbery was now a known problem. Everyone knew the pyramids were being looted, so builders tried to outsmart thieves. They failed. By the New Kingdom, pyramid building was abandoned. Pharaohs moved to hidden tombs in the Valley of the Kings. No big monuments, no obvious entrances, just secrecy. Which is ironic considering how famous those tombs became later. Meanwhile, pyramids continued to be built, just not in Egypt. Nubian kings in Kush adopted the pyramid tradition. They built dozens of small, steep pyramids at sites like Meroe. These pyramids were elegant, pointed, numerous. They honored Egyptian traditions while adding local flair. Many were later destroyed by treasure hunters because, again, humans. So why did the pyramid trend fade? Not because the Egyptians stopped believing in the afterlife. They never did. But because pyramids were expensive, impractical, and extremely visible. A hidden tomb had a better chance of surviving intact. Plus, religious ideas shifted. The afterlife became accessible to more people, not just kings. Texts once reserved for pharaohs spread to nobles. Eternity became democratized. The pyramid, once a symbol of divine kingship, became unnecessary. Still, their presence lingered. They influenced architecture, religion, and imagination long after they stopped being built. They were referenced, copied, remembered, and forgotten. So as we drift back toward the present, past crumbling stone and half-buried ruins, remember this: the pyramids weren't a single achievement. They were a long experiment, one that spanned centuries, changed shape, lost confidence, and eventually ended. But the ones that survived did so spectacularly, and that's why we're still here, still talking about them, still staring at triangles in the desert. Let's keep floating. All right, we're still floating, still unhurried. The desert has cooled off now and everything feels a little quieter. The pyramids, whether standing tall or crumbling into lumpy hills, have one thing in common. They were all robbed. Every single one. Which is impressive in a depressing way. Ancient Egyptians were not naive about this. They knew tomb robbery was a thing. They complained about it in letters. They punished it harshly. They even put the robbers on trial when they were caught. And still, it kept happening. Because gold is persuasive, and secrets don't stay secret forever. In the Old Kingdom, pyramid complexes were staffed long after burial. Priests maintained the cult of the dead king. Offerings were made daily, rituals performed. This meant people were constantly around the tomb, which meant people knew where things were. And eventually, someone noticed that the king was not using his jewelry anymore. Early tomb robbers didn't have to tunnel dramatically through solid stone. They often just reused entrances they already knew about. Sometimes the robbers were workers, sometimes priests, sometimes officials, sometimes everyone. There are records from later periods describing the systematic looting of royal tombs, not in secret, but as an open, organized activity. At one point, officials were moving royal mummies out of their original tombs and hiding them together in caches. Not to steal from them, but to protect what was left, which is kind of sad. Imagine being a god king, building a mountain of stone, only to be quietly relocated to a side room with a label. Still, the Egyptians tried everything to stop this. False doors, blocked passages, dead ends. Heavy granite plugs dropped into place after burial. Spells carved in walls warning of divine punishment. Things like, "Any who disturb this tomb shall be judged by the gods," or "Crocodiles will eat you, snakes will bite you, your name will be erased." Strong words, but history suggests not effective. The famous idea of the mummy's curse didn't really exist in ancient times the way we imagine it today. It's mostly a modern invention, a mix of Victorian sensationalism and early 20th century journalism. Ancient Egyptians believed in divine justice, sure, but most tomb inscriptions were practical, not dramatic. They were hoping fear might slow people down. It didn't. By the time archaeologists arrived centuries later, the pyramids were already empty shells. No mummies, no treasure, just stone. Which, ironically, is why they survived. Gold attracts attention, stone gets ignored. The Great Pyramid's burial chamber was already stripped bare long before anyone thought of studying it scientifically. That's why Khufu's pyramid feels so empty. No decorations, no inscriptions, just silence. Later tombs, especially in the Valley of the Kings, fared slightly better, but even those were mostly robbed. The few that survived intact, like Tutankhamun's was, did so by accident. His tomb was small, poorly placed, and buried under debris, a logistical failure that became a historical miracle. The pyramids never had that luxury. They were too big, too obvious. Still, people kept coming. Medieval travelers crawled inside, got lost, left graffiti. Early explorers used dynamite, which is a choice. They broke walls, blew open passages, chased rumors, often finding nothing. Modern archaeology has had to work around centuries of damage, collapsed corridors, missing stones, altered interiors. And yet, there's still more to learn. Recent scans have revealed hidden voids inside the Great Pyramid, large spaces we didn't know about. Not treasure chambers, just spaces. Structural features, construction leftovers. But even empty space excites people, because the pyramids invite projection. Everyone wants them to hold secrets. But maybe their biggest secret is how ordinary they are. Not in scale, not in ambition, but in motivation. They were built by people who wanted to be remembered, who were terrified of death, who trusted that systems, rituals, and stone could outlast chaos, which is very relatable. Over time, the pyramids took on new meanings. To Greeks, they were wonders. To Romans, curiosities. To medieval writers, mysteries. To modern tourists, bucket list items. They've been symbols of wisdom, tyranny, magic, arrogance, endurance, whatever the viewer needed them to be. Meanwhile, the pyramids themselves just exist. They don't explain themselves. They don't clarify myths. They don't defend their builders. They sit in the desert, eroding slowly, losing stone grain by grain. And still, they feel permanent. So as we drift deeper into the night and our thoughts get softer, remember this part of their story. Not the construction, not the kings, but the long, quiet centuries afterward. When the pyramids became empty rooms, echo chambers, stone memories. And somehow, that's enough. Let's keep floating. All right, we're still here, still moving gently forward. The desert is quieter now, but the world around the pyramids has gotten louder. Because at some point, the pyramids stopped being old monuments and started becoming ideas. By the 19th century, Egypt was firmly locked into the Western imagination. Archaeologists were measuring, artists were sketching, tourists were staring dramatically into the distance, and everyone had a theory. Some were sensible, most were not. This is when the pyramids began attracting explanations that said more about modern anxieties than ancient ones. People noticed the precision, the scale, the alignment, and instead of saying, "Wow, these people were extremely organized," they said, "Okay, but what if they weren't alone?" Cue the aliens. Extraterrestrial theories suggested the pyramids were too perfect to be human-made, which is a very creative way to underestimate ancient engineering. Others proposed lost civilizations, Atlantis, advanced ancient technology conveniently forgotten. These ideas had one thing in common. They ignored the actual evidence. We have worker villages, we have tools, we have unfinished pyramids, we have mistakes. The bent pyramid alone should have ended all supernatural speculation. But mysteries are comforting. They make the world feel enchanted. Even the pyramid's alignment with the cardinal directions fueled speculation. Yes, they're extremely precise, but the Egyptians were excellent astronomers. They observed the stars constantly. When you spend every night staring at the sky, you get good at it. The Orion correlation theory suggested the pyramids mirrored the stars of Orion's belt. It sounds poetic, but the match is generous. Still, it stuck, because people like symmetry. Numerology also joined the party. People found pi, the golden ratio, cosmic measurements, sometimes by stretching the numbers until they squeaked. If you look hard enough, you can find meaning in anything. Meanwhile, actual Egyptology continued quietly. Scholars studied quarry marks, construction ramps, tool wear. They proposed straight ramps, zigzag ramps, internal spiral ramps. None of these are glamorous, but they work, which makes them less fun. Modern technology added new tools: satellite imaging, ground-penetrating radar, muon scans. These revealed internal structures without breaking stone, hidden voids, stress relief spaces. No secret libraries, no glowing artifacts, just engineering. Tourism exploded in the 20th century. Roads were built, hotels rose, Cairo crept closer. The pyramids went from isolated monuments to urban neighbors. Camels, vendors, selfie sticks. The Sphinx watched it all, missing its nose, which, by the way, was not shot off by Napoleon. That myth refuses to die. The nose was already gone centuries earlier, likely damaged by religious iconoclasm. History is messy like that. Modern Egyptians live alongside these ancient structures. They're not relics from a dead land. They're part of a living country. Conservation efforts now try to balance preservation with access. Not easy. Pollution eats at the stone. Foot traffic wears down interiors. Every visitor leaves something behind: heat, moisture, breath. The pyramids endure, but they are not invincible. And yet, they're still here. Which brings us to the final quiet truth. The pyramids have outlived everything that built them: dynasties, languages, gods. Even their original meaning has shifted. They were meant to guarantee immortality for kings. Instead, they achieved immortality for themselves. We don't remember Khufu's face, we don't know his voice, but we know his pyramid. It's strange, isn't it? So, as we settle into the very late hours now, let your thoughts slow. Think of the pyramids not as puzzles to solve, but as reminders that humans have always feared being forgotten, have always tried to leave something behind, and sometimes they succeed. The desert grows quiet again. The stars wheel overhead. The pyramids remain. Unexplained if you want them to be. And that's okay. You don't have to solve them tonight. Just let them sit there. They've been waiting a long time. All right, this is the slow stretch now, the part where everything softens. If you've made it this far, You're either very comfortable or completely asleep. Either way, the pyramids don't mind. They've outlasted attention before. By now, we've followed them from fresh limestone brilliance to weathered stone, from divine machines to tourist backdrops, from sacred geometry to quiet silhouettes on the edge of a city. And through every phase, they've stayed remarkably consistent. They don't adapt. They don't explain themselves. They don't update. They just remain. Ancient Egyptians never imagined us standing here, centuries later, arguing online about ramps. They weren't thinking about future scholars or documentaries. They were thinking about tomorrow in the cosmic sense. About making sure the sun rose again, about keeping order intact, about making death survivable. The pyramids were part of that system, not decorations, not mysteries, infrastructure, which somehow makes them more impressive. Each block was placed by someone with sore arms and a schedule to keep, someone who went home at night, someone who ate bread and onions and complained about the heat. They weren't thinking about eternity, they were thinking about the next stone. That's how most monumental things get built, one ordinary day at a time. We tend to imagine the pyramids as frozen moments, but they were active places. Priests walked their causeways, offerings smoked in their temples, voices echoed in courtyards now buried or gone. For centuries, they were part of daily life. Then they weren't. And that transition didn't happen suddenly. It happened quietly. Rituals stopped. Priests disappeared. Stones were taken. No dramatic ending, just forgetting. Which might be the most human ending of all. Today, the pyramids are protected, studied, photographed endlessly, but they're no longer used, and maybe that's their final form. Not active monuments, not religious centers, just witnesses. They've watched humanity change its mind about almost everything. Gods, governments, what matters. And still, we keep coming back to them, because something about their presence calms us. They're solid in a world that isn't. They don't react to news cycles. They don't care who's in charge. They existed before most of our problems, and they'll probably exist after, which makes them strangely comforting. So as the night thins out now and your thoughts start drifting away, let's leave the pyramids as they are. Not puzzles, not proof of anything mystical, just stone expressions of very old hopes. People once believed these shapes could hold a soul forever. They were wrong about that part, but they were right about one thing. Build something with care, give it purpose, and it might outlast you. The desert grows still again. The pyramids catch the first hint of dawn. And whether anyone is watching or not, they stay. That's it for tonight. No secrets left to uncover. No answers demanded. Just quiet stone and the long, slow passing of time. Sleep well. Part 8. The long silence after, and the comfort of things that don't need us. All right, we're very much in the after hours now. This is the part where the night feels thinner, like it might dissolve if you look at it too closely. The pyramids are still there. They always are. By now, most of the world is asleep. Cities hum quietly, roads empty out, and out in the desert, the temperature drops just enough to remind you that stone remembers the day longer than people do. One of the strangest things about the pyramids is how little they require from us. They don't need belief anymore. They don't need rituals. They don't even need attention. They've entered a phase of existence that very few human creations ever reach. They simply persist. Civilizations usually need maintenance. Stories need retelling. Institutions need enforcement. But the pyramids crossed some invisible threshold where gravity and mass took over the job of meaning. They're heavy enough that forgetting them completely is almost impossible. And yet forgetting why they exist was easy. Ask most people what the pyramids were for, and you'll get vague answers. Tombs, mysteries, energy centers, something spiritual. The original, very specific anxieties that produced them are mostly gone. The fear that the sun might not rise, the need to physically anchor order to the landscape, the certainty that a king's body had to be preserved at all costs. Those fears feel distant now, but the shape remains. And humans are very good at projecting new meaning onto old shapes. For a while, the pyramids symbolized lost wisdom, then tyranny, then enlightenment, then mystery again. They've been claimed by science, by spirituality, by conspiracy forums at 3 in the morning. They absorb it all without comment, which is probably their most impressive quality. Even erosion feels patient here. Wind smooths edges, sand softens corners, pollution dulls surfaces. Nothing dramatic, just slow subtraction. The pyramids are not collapsing, they're thinning, becoming slightly less sharp each century. And that's okay. They were never meant to be eternal in a literal sense, just eternal enough. Longer than a reign, longer than a dynasty, longer than memory. And they succeeded. There's something comforting about knowing that not everything is fragile, that some things can be built so slowly, so deliberately, that they don't care if we understand them anymore. Most human creations beg for interpretation. The pyramids do not. They don't explain themselves because they don't have to. They were complete the moment the last stone was set. Everything after that, the myths, the theories, the documentaries, the whispered what-ifs, that's all extra, optional. So if you're still awake right now, let your thoughts rest there. Not on the labor, not on the kings, not on the unanswered questions, just on the idea that something can exist without needing resolution. The pyramids don't need to be solved to be impressive. They don't need to be mysterious to matter. They're just very old answers to very old fears. And tonight, that's enough. The desert goes quiet again. The horizon lightens almost imperceptibly, and the pyramids remain exactly where they were. Unconcerned, unrushed, unfinished only in our imagination. You don't need to stay with them any longer. They'll still be there when you wake up. All right, this is the very end of the night. That quiet, in-between stretch where sleep loosens its grip, but morning hasn't fully arrived yet. Somewhere out there, the sun is getting ready to do the thing it's done thousands of times before. And the pyramids are waiting for it, like they always have. Sunrise at Giza is subtle. No drama, no announcement. The light just slowly slides across stone that's been catching it for 4.5 millennia. This was always the point. The pyramids weren't meant for moonlight theories or late-night speculation. They were solar objects, built for the daily rebirth of the sun, built to reflect it, built to join it. Every morning in ancient Egypt was proof that the system still worked, that order hadn't collapsed, that chaos was still being held at bay. The pyramids were part of that reassurance. And now, long after the ritual stopped, the sun keeps rising anyway, which is a little ironic. The priests are gone, the spells are silent, the gods have changed names, but the light still hits the same angles, still slides down the same faces, still fills the same empty spaces. The pyramids don't acknowledge the passage of time the way we do. They don't mark anniversaries. They don't care about centuries. They exist on a different scale, one where human lifespans barely register. A blink, a breath, a footstep in the sand that's gone by afternoon. And yet, for all their indifference, we keep returning. We bring cameras, questions, children, expectations. We want them to explain something about the past, about ourselves. But the pyramids don't teach in sentences. They teach in presence. They remind us that certainty is temporary, that belief systems rise and fall, that even the most confident civilizations eventually become archaeology. And somehow, that's not depressing. It's grounding, because it means we don't have to get everything right. We don't have to solve every mystery. We don't have to build forever. We just have to build well enough. The ancient Egyptians didn't win eternity the way they expected. Their names faded, their gods quieted, but their effort remained. And effort counts for something. So as the sun finally clears the horizon, the pyramids do what they've always done. They stand there, they warm up, they cast long shadows that slowly retreat, and they pretend, very convincingly, that nothing unusual has happened at all. Another night passed, another morning arrived, and that's the rhythm they were built for. Not excitement, not revelation, just continuity. If you're waking up now, let that be the last thing you carry with you, that some things don't rush, some things don't react, some things don't need your attention to exist. The pyramids will be fine without us. And somehow, knowing that, lets us rest a little easier too. That's it. No grand conclusion, no final secret. Just stone, sunlight, and time doing what it does best. Thanks for drifting along. Sleep well. All right. This is the part that comes after the ending, when the credits would normally roll, but nothing actually changes. The sun is fully up now. The desert is awake, and the pyramids are already bored with the day. Tour buses will arrive soon. Guides will raise their voices just enough to carry. Someone will ask about aliens. Someone always does. The pyramids will not respond. They've heard it all before. They've watched people arrive with certainty, curiosity, reverence, skepticism, and absolutely no sunscreen. They've seen awe turn into selfies. They've seen silence turn into noise. And then, eventually, they've seen everyone leave. That part never changes. By mid-afternoon, the heat settles in. Stone radiates warmth it absorbed hours earlier. Shadows shrink. This is when the pyramids feel the most distant from us. Not mysterious, not dramatic, just indifferent. They were built by humans, yes, but they stopped belonging to humans a long time ago. At some point, scale takes over. Time takes over. Gravity takes over. Intentions fade. That's one of the quieter truths about the pyramids. They were once overloaded with meaning. Every measurement mattered. Every angle symbolized something cosmic. Now, they don't symbolize anything unless we ask them to. They've become neutral. And neutrality, it turns out, is peaceful. We tend to think monuments exist to communicate, to say something important across time. But the pyramids aren't messages. They're leftovers. Not in a dismissive way, in a very human way. They're what remains after belief systems dissolve, and there's something honest about that. Most things we build don't survive the ideas that created them. They get repurposed, rewritten, demolished. The pyramids didn't. They were too big to adapt, too heavy to reimagine, so they stayed what they were, even after no one remembered why that mattered. And that's where we find them now. Not sacred, not secret, just present. At night, after the tourists are gone and the air cools again, the pyramids return to their natural state, quiet. The desert doesn't care about explanations. The stars don't require context. Wind moves sand grain by grain, the way it always has. Edges soften, lines blur. Nothing urgent. This is the pace the pyramids understand. They've never been in a hurry. They were built slowly. They decay slowly. Even collapse someday will take its time. And that's comforting in a strange way. Because we live in a world that rushes everything. News cycles, opinions, judgments. The pyramids exist outside of that rhythm. They don't react when they're misunderstood. They don't correct anyone. They just stand there, letting people be wrong loudly, which might be the wisest thing any monument has ever done. Ancient Egyptians believed permanence was a goal. They chased it with stone and ritual and obsession. They didn't quite get the permanence they imagined, but they got something else: endurance. And endurance doesn't require clarity. It doesn't require agreement. It doesn't even require remembrance. It just requires staying. So if there's any final thought to take from all of this, as the night fades completely, as the day settles in, it's this: the pyramids don't need us to finish their story. We're just passing through it for a moment. They were here before our questions. They'll be here after our answers change. And that's okay. You can let them go now. They're not waiting for anything. They're not hiding anything. They're just very old stone shapes doing exactly what they were built to do: take up space, hold weight, and remain. That's the end of our slow walk through ancient Egypt tonight. No mysteries hanging hand, no revelations waiting around the corner, just quiet persistence. Thanks for staying awake, or asleep, or somewhere comfortably in between. The pyramids will handle the rest. All right, we're looping gently now, back toward the beginning. Not because there's something new to uncover, but because this is usually where human curiosity wanders when it gets tired. The pyramids have a way of pulling us backward. Every generation does this. They arrive late to the story, stand in the sand, and ask the same quiet question: why this? Why this shape? Why this place? Why this much effort for a single body that was never going to last anyway? And the answer, inconveniently, is never just one thing. So let's drift back again, not to Giza as ruins, but to Giza as an idea that hasn't hardened yet. Picture the plateau before the pyramids: just desert limestone, wind, silence. No skyline, no shadows stretching for miles, no expectation that this place would matter forever. Somewhere far away, along the Nile, a royal court hums with daily life. Officials argue, priests observe the sky, scribes sharpen reeds and complain about their hands. And a decision is forming. Not all at once, not dramatically, more like a slow consensus that builds the way traditions do. The king will need a tomb. The tomb will need to last. And last time, the tomb didn't quite last enough. This is how escalation begins. The earliest pyramid builders weren't trying to astonish the future. They were trying to solve a problem left behind by the past. Earlier tombs had been robbed, earlier monuments had decayed, earlier kings had faded faster than expected, and that felt unacceptable because Egyptian kingship was tied directly to cosmic stability. If the king failed in death, order itself felt shaky. So the solution became physical: bigger stone, better planning, more mass. If time erodes everything, then the answer is to overwhelm time, which is a very human impulse. The pyramid is, at its core, an argument, a disagreement with impermanence. It says, no, not yet, not this. And for a while, it worked. The Great Pyramid didn't just dominate the landscape, it reorganized it. Quarries were opened, roads were laid, harbors were dug, villages appeared and vanished with the work seasons. This wasn't one project, it was an economy. Thousands of people fed, housed, healed, and directed toward a single purpose. Not worship, not art, logistics. And this is the part we don't linger on enough. The pyramids were not miracles, they were management. Schedules, rotations, supply chains. Someone had to know how much bread was needed per day, how much beer, how many workers could haul stone without collapsing. Someone had to track injuries, deaths, and replacements. Someone had to decide that this block goes here and not there, and that this mistake will be hidden under casing stone so no one ever sees it. And that someone probably went home exhausted. We like to imagine ancient builders as timeless figures, but they aged, they got sore, they quit, they were replaced. The pyramid absorbed all of that human turnover and turned it into stillness, which is unsettlingly effective. Inside the pyramid, once sealed, nothing moved. Air stopped circulating, sound disappeared. Time slowed down in a way that living spaces never allow. That was intentional. The pyramid was designed to be separate from the world of change, a controlled environment where decay could be delayed. And in that sense, it worked too. Organic materials survived, wood, textiles, but meaning did not. Meaning leaked out over centuries, through reinterpretation, through neglect, through reuse. By the time later Egyptians looked at the pyramids, they were already unsure how everything worked. By the time Greeks arrived, the explanations were mostly stories. By the time we arrived, we brought theories. And now, after all that, we mostly bring ourselves, our expectations, our need for closure. But the pyramids don't offer closure. They offer scale. They remind us that humans have always tried to solve emotional problems with physical solutions. Fear of death, build stone. Fear of forgetting, carve names. Fear of chaos, align things perfectly. And sometimes those solutions last long enough that the original fear becomes irrelevant. We don't fear what the ancient Egyptians feared, not in the same way, but we recognize the impulse, that urge to leave something behind that feels heavier than doubt. So we circle back, again and again. Documentaries restart, books get rewritten, new scans are released, and the pyramids accept all of it with the same indifference they've always had. They don't reward obsession, they don't punish misunderstanding, they just exist at a scale where urgency feels unnecessary, which is why they make such effective bedtime companions. They slow thought, flatten emotion, stretch perspective. They remind us that most things do not need resolution to be complete. The pyramid was finished the moment the last stone was placed. Everything after that, robbery, erosion, theories, awe, is just aftermath. And that's strangely freeing, because it means you don't have to figure them out tonight. You don't have to decide what they mean. You can let them be what they are, very old answers to questions that no longer need to be asked. So if your thoughts are drifting now, let them drift, back through the desert, back through time, back to the quiet moment before the first stone was laid, before ambition hardened into geometry. The pyramids were once an idea, now they're a presence, and presences don't require explanation. They just sit with you until you fall asleep. Take your time, they're very good at waiting. All right, we're well past the point where stories usually end now. This is the stretch after conclusions, after lessons, after meaning gets tired of explaining itself. The pyramids are very comfortable here. There's a strange peace in realizing that nothing new is required of them anymore. They don't need defending, they don't need decoding. They don't need to prove anything. They've already done the one thing they were built to do. They stayed. If you could stand near them late enough, after the buses leave, after the guards settle into stillness, you'd notice how quickly the modern world fades. Engines stop, voices thin out, lights soften, and then the pyramids return to their preferred condition: silence. This is the silence they were designed for. Not emptiness, not absence, just low activity. In ancient Egypt, silence wasn't nothingness. It was order holding steady. The pyramids were never meant to be loud monuments. They weren't stages. They weren't gathering places. They were sealed statements. Once finished, the goal was to stop interacting with them. Seal the passages, block the corridors, walk away. A completed pyramid was one you didn't need to visit again, which feels counterintuitive to us. We build things to be used, visited, updated. The Egyptians built pyramids to be left alone. That's why they feel so alien. They weren't part of daily life for very long. They were part of eternity. And eternity, it turns out, is mostly boring. That's not a criticism, it's a feature. Nothing dramatic is supposed to happen in a pyramid. No movement, no change. Just weight pressing downward, stone settling into stone. A controlled stillness. When tomb robbers broke that stillness, it wasn't shocking to the universe. It was just noise, temporary noise. The pyramids absorbed it and continued. That's the part we tend to miss. We talk about violation, desecration, loss, but the pyramids don't respond to those ideas. They don't care if they're empty. They were never really about what was inside. They were about being there. A marker saying, at one point, humans gathered here and tried very hard to make something permanent. And then they left. Modern culture struggles with that idea. We like progress, continuation, maintenance. We don't like the idea that a structure could be finished and then abandoned on purpose. But the pyramids were finished when they stopped being needed. That's a kind of confidence we don't have anymore. We constantly revise, patch, update. The pyramids say, no, this is enough. Even erosion doesn't feel like failure here. It's expected. The ancient Egyptians knew stone would wear down. They just trusted that it would take long enough. And they were right. We often talk about how long the pyramids have lasted, but the more interesting part is how slowly they're disappearing. No collapse, no sudden end, just gradual softening, corners rounding, surfaces dulling. They're not resisting time, they're cooperating with it. That's a very different relationship than we have with decay. We panic when things age. We rush to preserve. The pyramids accept aging as part of the deal. They were never meant to look new forever. They were meant to look present. And they still do. If you zoom out far enough, far beyond dynasties, religions, languages, the pyramids become less about Egypt and more about scale. They're reminders that humans have always lived with the awareness that they won't last. And sometimes, instead of coping emotionally, they cope physically. They stack stone. They align it with the sky. They say, this should hold. And occasionally, it does. That's not a guarantee. It's not a promise. Just a possibility, which makes the pyramids less mystical and more relatable. They're the result of hope expressed through effort. Not perfect hope, not gentle hope, heavy hope, the kind that leaves marks. So if your thoughts are thinning now, if they're stretching out, losing edges, that's exactly where this story wants to leave you. Not with answers, not with awe, but with the quiet comfort of something that doesn't demand anything else from you. The pyramids aren't waiting for interpretation. They aren't disappointed if you misunderstand them. They've already passed the point of caring. They're just very old structures existing in a wide, patient world. And for tonight, that's enough. Let the desert settle. Let the stones cool. Let the story dissolve. The pyramids will still be there when language falls away. They always are. All right, let's slow this part way down. This is the stretch where nothing dramatic happens, and that's kind of the point. We're leaving the builders behind now. The shouting foremen, the hauling crews, the last casing stones being nudged into place. The pyramids are finished, and for the first time since construction began, they become very, very quiet. This is something we don't talk about enough. The pyramids weren't meant to be active forever. Once the king was buried, the whole goal was stillness. Seal the corridors, block the entrances, walk away. A successful pyramid was one no one ever needed to enter again. For a while, that worked. Priests continued their rituals nearby. Offerings were brought to valley temples. The king's cult was maintained. But even then, the pyramid itself stayed closed, dark, airless, unchanging. Years passed, then decades, then generations, and eventually, people forgot the details. Not all at once, just slowly. By the time of the New Kingdom, hundreds of years later, the pyramids were already ancient. Think about that for a moment. To Cleopatra, the pyramids were older than Cleopatra is to us. They had already passed into legend while Egypt was still Egypt. New pharaohs ruled from Thebes. They worshipped different gods more intensely. They built different kinds of tombs. And the pyramids just sat there. Ancient Egyptians still visited them. They left graffiti, little notes scratched into stone. Nothing grand, just things like, "I came here with my brother," or "I saw this place," which is oddly comforting. Even then, people stood in front of the pyramids and didn't know what to say. The Great Pyramid, once smooth and blindingly white, began to change. Earthquakes loosened casing stones. Wind carried sand against its sides. Rain, rare but destructive, found cracks. And humans noticed something important. That stone was useful. Cairo didn't exist yet, but settlements nearby were growing. Buildings needed material. Those beautiful limestone casing blocks were already cut, already shaped, already right there. So they were taken. Piece by piece, the pyramids were undressed. Not vandalized, not destroyed, reused. Mosques, walls, houses. Parts of medieval Cairo are built from pyramid stone, which means the pyramids didn't just survive history, they were absorbed into it. The Sphinx had a different fate. While the pyramids slowly lost stone, the Sphinx slowly disappeared. Sand piled up around its body, only the head remained visible for long periods. Imagine that. A massive stone face staring out of the desert with its entire body buried. People came to it, prayed to it, cleared it, then left again. The sand always came back. At one point, a pharaoh named Thutmose IV fell asleep near the Sphinx. He dreamed it spoke to him. It promised him the throne if he cleared away the sand. He did, and he became king, which is either divine destiny or excellent political storytelling. Either way, the Sphinx enjoyed a brief moment of attention. Then the sand returned. Time has a way of reclaiming things when enthusiasm fades. Foreign powers arrived. First the Persians, then the Greeks. Alexander the Great entered Egypt and was welcomed as a liberator. After his death, the Ptolemies ruled. They admired the pyramids, they wrote about them, but they didn't fully understand them. Greek historians like Herodotus recorded what local guides told them. Some of it was accurate, some of it was not. Herodotus claimed the pyramids were built by slaves, that hundreds of thousands of people suffered terribly. This version stuck. It was dramatic, and drama travels well. Reality, as usual, was more organized and less cinematic. Then came the Romans. To them, Egypt was ancient even by imperial standards. Roman elites visited the pyramids like tourists. They carved their names into stone because humans have always wanted proof they were there. They marveled, they speculated, then moved on. Christianity arrived, then Islam. Egypt's religious world changed completely. The pyramids didn't fit neatly into new belief systems. Some thought they were built by giants. Others believed they were granaries from biblical times. There were stories about hidden knowledge sealed inside, magic, alchemy, ancient science. None of this came from the pyramids. It came from the silence. Silence invites imagination. By the medieval period, the pyramids were half myth, half ruin. Occasionally, someone decided to investigate. In the 9th century, the Abbasid Caliph al-Mamun ordered a tunnel dug into the Great Pyramid, not delicately, just straight through the stone. His workers hammered for weeks hoping to find treasure. Eventually, they broke into an internal passage. Inside, nothing. No gold, no royal body, no cosmic library, just empty chambers and stale air. That tunnel is still there today, a permanent scar of curiosity meeting disappointment. Years passed, then decades, then generations, and eventually, people forgot the details. Not all at once, just slowly. By the time of the New Kingdom, hundreds of years later, the pyramids were already ancient. Think about that for a moment. To Cleopatra, the pyramids were older than Cleopatra is to us. They had already passed into legend while Egypt was still Egypt. New pharaohs ruled from Thebes. They worshipped different gods more intensely. They built different kinds of tombs. And the pyramids just sat there. Ancient Egyptians still visited them. They left graffiti, little notes scratched into stone. Nothing grand, just things like, "I came here with my brother," or "I saw this place," which is oddly comforting. Even then, people stood in front of the pyramids and didn't know what to say. The Great Pyramid, once smooth and blindingly white, began to change. Earthquakes loosened casing stones. Wind carried sand against its sides. Rain, rare but destructive, found cracks. And humans noticed something important. That stone was useful. Cairo didn't exist yet, but settlements nearby were growing. Buildings needed material. Those beautiful limestone casing blocks were already cut, already shaped, already right there. So they were taken. Piece by piece, the pyramids were undressed. Not vandalized, not destroyed, reused. Mosques, walls, houses. Parts of medieval Cairo are built from pyramid stone, which means the pyramids didn't just survive history, they were absorbed into it. The Sphinx had a different fate. While the pyramids slowly lost stone, the Sphinx slowly disappeared. Sand piled up around its body, only the head remained visible for long periods. Imagine that. A massive stone face staring out of the desert with its entire body buried. People came to it, prayed to it, cleared it, then left again. The sand always came back. At one point, a pharaoh named Thutmose IV fell asleep near the Sphinx. He dreamed it spoke to him. It promised him the throne if he cleared away the sand. He did, and he became king, which is either divine destiny or excellent political storytelling. Either way, the Sphinx enjoyed a brief moment of attention. Then the sand returned. Time has a way of reclaiming things when enthusiasm fades. Foreign powers arrived. First, the Persians, then the Greeks. Alexander the Great entered Egypt and was welcomed as a liberator. After his death, the Ptolemies ruled. They admired the pyramids, they wrote about them, but they didn't fully understand them. Greek historians like Herodotus recorded what local guides told them. Some of it was accurate, some of it was not. Herodotus claimed the pyramids were built by slaves, that hundreds of thousands of people suffered terribly. This version stuck. It was dramatic, and drama travels well. Reality, as usual, was more organized and less cinematic. Then came the Romans. To them, Egypt was ancient even by imperial standards. Roman elites visited the pyramids like tourists. They carved their names into stone, because humans have always wanted.
All right, if you're still here, this is the deep end of the night. This is the part where even history stops trying to entertain you. The pyramids have been standing long enough now that they don't register events the way we do. Wars blur. Empires smear together. Names fade into texture. From this distance, history isn't a sequence, it's a hum. And the pyramids exist inside that hum like background furniture. Not sacred anymore, not shocking, just present. At some point, the desert learned how to work around them. Sand flows differently near the bases. Wind changes direction around the corners. Temperature settles into predictable patterns. The pyramids didn't conquer the environment. They negotiated with it. They became part of the desert's breathing cycle. Day heats the stone. Night releases it. Expansion, contraction, very slow movement, almost polite. You can stand near them at dusk and feel this shift happen, the heat lifting, the air thinning. It's subtle. You'd miss it if you were looking for drama. And that's the trick with pyramids. They punish impatience. People arrive expecting revelation, alignment, energy. What they get instead is scale and silence, which is deeply annoying until it isn't, because once you stop asking the pyramids to perform, they become easier to be around. They don't reward curiosity with answers. They reward stillness with perspective. Ancient Egyptians understood this better than we do. Their religion wasn't obsessed with discovery. It was obsessed with balance, mot, order, continuity, the quiet agreement that the universe would keep going if humans didn't mess with it too aggressively. The pyramids weren't acts of dominance. They were attempts to lock something in place, a moment, a king, a version of order. Not forever, just long enough. And they succeeded, kind of. The kings vanished, the rituals stopped, but the shape held. That's the compromise history often makes. Meaning dissolves, structure remains. Which brings us to modern Egypt, a place where the pyramids are everywhere and nowhere at once. They're on money, logos, school books, and also just down the road. People commute past them, live near them, ignore them, which feels correct. The pyramids were never meant to dominate daily thought. They were meant to sit at the edge of awareness, visible but not intrusive, a reminder that time is large and humans are temporary, without needing to shout about it. Modern preservation debates swirl around them. Should we restore casing stones? Should we let erosion continue? Should tourists be limited? The pyramids do not participate in these discussions. They will accept whatever outcome occurs. That's the advantage of being stone. You don't have to take sides. Even climate change, dramatic as it is for us, arrives at the pyramids gently. A little more moisture, a little more stress. Nothing urgent yet. Urgency is a human concept. The pyramids operate with patience. There's a temptation to believe they'll always be here. They won't. Eventually, the desert will win. Corners will soften further. Internal chambers will weaken. Stone will return to sand. But not in our lifetime, or the next, which is enough, because permanence was never the real goal. Continuity was. The pyramids don't need to be eternal. They just need to last long enough to make time feel heavy, and they've done that. If your thoughts are thinning now, stretching, slowing, that's intentional. This is the zone the pyramids live in. No sharp edges, no conclusions, just long awareness. They don't care if you understand them. They don't care if you misunderstand them. They've already outlasted both positions. So as this part drifts towards silence, let the pyramids fade back into the background where they prefer to be. Not mysteries, not monuments, just very old shapes that learned how to stay put while the world rearranged itself around them. We'll keep going, slowly. There's no rush.
All right. Settle back in again. This part doesn't need momentum. It doesn't need direction. It just needs time. Imagine you're not standing at Giza anymore. Not walking, not touring. You're sitting. Maybe on a low stone wall, maybe on warm sand that still holds the day. The pyramids are in front of you, but you're not really looking at them. They're just there. That's usually when they start making sense. The human brain gets tired of trying to interpret them. It gives up asking questions. And once that happens, the pyramids become strangely gentle. They don't demand reverence. They don't punish indifference. They exist whether or not you're paying attention. That's rare. Most things in our lives want engagement, notifications, updates, responses. The pyramids don't even acknowledge you. And somehow, that's comforting. 10 minutes is nothing to them. 10 centuries is barely noticeable. They've seen more serious things than us sitting quietly. They've seen dynasties collapse without warning, religions rewrite themselves, languages disappear completely. They've watched belief systems rise, argue, fracture, and quietly dissolve. And they did not react. That's not wisdom. That's scale. We tend to project wisdom onto old things, but the pyramids aren't wise. They're just heavy. They can afford to ignore most of reality. That weight presses downward constantly, keeping them honest. No performance, no flexibility, just gravity doing what it always does. The ancient builders understood this. They trusted gravity more than magic. That's why the pyramids still stand. Not because of secrets, not because of lost technology, because stacking stone in the simplest, most stable way possible works. It's boring, and boring lasts. You can feel this if you stay long enough. Your sense of urgency starts to loosen. Thoughts stretch out. Problems that felt sharp earlier soften around the edges. The pyramids don't solve anything for you. They just put things in proportion. That might be their only remaining function. At night, the stars come back. Not dramatically, just quietly. They don't align perfectly with the pyramids anymore, if they ever did. Precession shifted them over millennia. The sky moved on, and the pyramids stayed. That's another uncomfortable truth. The pyramids weren't perfectly tuned to eternity. They were tuned to a specific moment in time. and time did what it always does. It changed. But instead of breaking the pyramid's purpose, that change made them more interesting. They're no longer tools, they're artifacts. That transition from functional to symbolic is where most human creations end. We usually don't notice when it happens. One day something is necessary, the next day it's decorative, then historical, then forgotten. The pyramids skipped the forgotten part, not because they're important, but because they're impossible to ignore completely. Even when you stop caring, they're still visible. That's a strange kind of survival. If you listen carefully, really carefully, you might notice how quiet the desert actually is. Not silent, just restrained. Wind, distant movement, occasional sound carried and lost. The pyramids fit into that soundscape perfectly. They don't interrupt it. They absorb it. And when you leave, when everyone leaves, the desert closes back around them. Sand shifts, footprints vanish. The pyramids are alone again, which is how they prefer it. They were never meant to be social spaces. They were meant to be endpoints, the place where effort stopped. And effort stopping is underrated. We don't stop enough. We keep pushing, building, optimizing. The pyramids remind us what it looks like when humans decide something is finished. Not abandoned, finished. There's a difference. Finished things can rest, and resting things last longer. So if you've been carrying thoughts through this, half-formed, heavy, slow, this is where you can set them down. You don't need conclusions. The pyramids don't provide them. They just provide presence. And sometimes that's the most useful thing there is. Stay here as long as you like. 10 minutes, 10 breaths, 10 centuries. The pyramids won't notice. And that's okay. We'll drift onward when you're ready.
All right. This is the part where thoughts start doing their own thing. You're not really listening anymore, not fully asleep, not fully awake. Perfect. The pyramids exist comfortably in this mental zone. They don't need your attention to stay real. You can let your mind drift away from them, and when it wanders back, they'll still be there. That reliability is rare. Most things vanish the moment we stop thinking about them. Schedules, worries, names we meant to remember. The pyramids don't do that. They don't flicker when forgotten. They don't fade when misunderstood. They wait without waiting. Ancient Egyptians would have appreciated this state. Their idea of the afterlife wasn't about excitement, it was about continuity. Fields, familiar routines, the same sun rising and setting forever. No surprises. That's what the pyramids promised. Not adventure, not revelation, stability. And stability is quiet. It's repetitive, predictable, almost boring, which makes it perfect for sleep. The pyramids were built with this understanding. Every block placed with the expectation that nothing interesting would ever happen again. That's not pessimism, that's confidence. Confidence that order, once established, could simply continue, even if no one was watching, especially if no one was watching. Over time, that confidence outlived the people who felt it. The builders died, their names faded. The pyramids didn't need replacements. They didn't require caretakers. They just existed. That's something we don't design for anymore. Everything today wants interaction, feedback, engagement. The pyramids want distance. They function best when ignored, which is why, paradoxically, they survived. No one tried to fix them for centuries.
No one updated them, no one modernized them. They were left alone long enough to become untouchable. Your thoughts might be thinning now, sentences slipping past without being caught. That's good. That's the pace this story was always meant to reach. The pyramids don't operate in sharp focus. They're background architecture for consciousness, something solid to drift past while the mind loosens its grip. If your breathing has slowed, match it to the rhythm of stone cooling after sunset. Slow expansion, slow release. The pyramids do this every night. They've done it for thousands of years. They don't get bored of it. They don't rush to morning. They let time pass through them, which is the opposite of how we usually live. We push through time. We rush it. The pyramids let it move. There's no moral lesson here, no takeaway, just a different pace being modeled quietly in the background. If sleep comes, let it. If thoughts wander, let them wander. The pyramids don't care where your attention goes. They're not trying to teach you. They're just nearby. And sometimes that's all something needs to be. We'll continue drifting. No pressure, no direction. The stone will stay put.
All right, this is where the story almost stops moving. Not ends, just pauses. The pyramids are very familiar with pauses. They've spent most of their existence inside one. Between footsteps, between empires, between sentences that never get finished. If you imagine time as a long conversation, the pyramids exist during the awkward silences, and they're completely comfortable there. Humans tend to rush through quiet moments. We fill them with noise, explanations, distractions. The pyramids never learns that habit. They stand without commentary, which is why they feel heavier when everything else quiets down. Not physically heavier, mentally. Your thoughts slow to match them. That's not the pyramids doing anything special. That's your brain finally dropping to their speed. This is roughly the speed of geology, of erosion, of things that don't check the time. Ancient Egyptians tried to tune themselves to this pace through ritual, repetition, chants, daily cycles that mirrored cosmic ones. They believed stability came from doing the same thing correctly over and over. The pyramids were the ultimate version of that belief. One shape, one purpose, repeated at enormous scale. No improvisation once finished. And now, thousands of years later, they still demonstrate that philosophy just by standing there. If your mind drifts to random places now, unfinished memories, half dreams, that's expected. The pyramids don't hold narratives. They don't push stories forward. They just hold space. That makes them ideal companions for this part of the night. Nothing demands resolution here. You don't need to remember names, dates, dynasties. Those details already served their purpose earlier. Now, we're past that. This is where history dissolves into atmosphere. The desert air cools further. Stone releases heat in slow, patient waves. This happens every night. The pyramids don't mark it. They don't celebrate it. They don't react. They simply participate. That participation, quiet, constant, is what's left when intention disappears. Builders once stood where you're imagining yourself now. They shouted, they planned, they worried. Then they left. The pyramids didn't keep their voices. They didn't preserve their stress. Only the structure remained. That's another subtle comfort. So much human noise evaporates. What remains is usually simpler, heavier, calmer. If sleep is close now, let it happen. You don't need to hear every word. The pyramids don't mind being partially forgotten. They've been forgotten better than this before. We'll continue drifting, slowly, gently, through the spaces where nothing much happens. That's where they've always lived. All right. We're deep enough now that time feels soft. This is the part where the pyramids stop being objects in a story and start feeling more like background weather. They're not the focus anymore. They're just present, which is exactly how they've spent most of their existence. Thousands of years passed with nothing worth recording happening to them at all. No ceremonies, no visitors, no meaning being added or removed. Just sun, wind, sand. The pyramids are very familiar with uneventful centuries. We're not. Our lives are packed with updates, milestones, interruptions. We measure time by change. The pyramids measure it by lack of change. That's why they feel so strange to us. If you could compress their entire lifespan into something human-sized, most of it would look identical. Same angles, same shadows, same silence. That doesn't make them stagnant, it makes them stable. Stability is underrated because it doesn't photograph well. Nothing happens. But nothing breaking, that's actually impressive. At night, when the desert is empty and the air settles completely, the pyramids blend into the darkness. Their outlines soften. They stop looking monumental. They start looking natural, like hills that just happen to be triangular. That illusion isn't accidental. The pyramids weren't designed to fight nature forever. They were designed to eventually resemble it. Sharp edges dull, perfect lines relax. The shape remains, but the precision fades, which is probably closer to what the builders expected. Perfection was never meant to last, only presence. Your thoughts may be doing something similar now, edges softening, details slipping away. You're not losing focus, you're transitioning. The pyramids exist comfortably in this mental blur. They don't need to be clearly defined to remain real. Ancient Egyptians believed the soul had multiple parts. Some stayed with the body, some traveled, some needed names and memory to survive. The pyramids weren't built for just one part of the soul. They were built to support forgetting as much as remembering, a place where identity could dissolve safely, where individuality could flatten into continuity. That's another reason they feel calming now. They don't insist that you stay sharp. They don't require attention. They're fine if you fade in and out. Most of history happened without witnesses. The pyramids are reminders of that. Empires rose and collapsed while they stood unattended. Borders moved, languages shifted. The pyramids didn't need to be informed. They didn't adapt. They just remained available. Available to be misunderstood, available to be ignored, available to be reinterpreted centuries later. That availability is subtle but powerful. Nothing about the pyramids is urgent, and urgency is exhausting. You might notice now that the story has almost completely dissolved. There's no arc anymore, no destination, just a slow, steady continuation. That's intentional. The pyramids don't build toward conclusions. They outlast them. They've seen endings come and go. They didn't participate. So if your breathing has slowed, if your thoughts are looping gently or drifting sideways, that's not distraction. That's alignment. This is the pace the pyramids move at. Not forward, not backward. just steady. Eventually, even this part will pass, not because something happens, but because time does what it always does. It continues quietly. The pyramids will continue too, not dramatically, not heroically, just by remaining where they are. And for now, that's more than enough. We'll keep drifting.
All right. This is where language itself starts to thin out, not disappear, just loosen its grip. The pyramids are very patient with this phase. They've existed long enough to watch entire languages rise, peak, fracture, and vanish without leaving a single readable sentence behind. Hieroglyphs once covered walls nearby, bright, intentional, confident. Then no one could read them. For centuries, the pyramids were surrounded by writing that meant nothing to anyone alive. And nothing bad happened. The world continued. That's a quiet lesson we don't talk about much. Meaning is temporary. Structure isn't. The pyramids never relied on interpretation to remain real. They didn't collapse when understanding was lost. They didn't fade when stories stopped circulating. They waited. Waiting is something stone is very good at. If your mind feels like it's drifting in small circles now, revisiting the same half-thoughts, the same images, that's okay. The pyramids repeat themselves constantly. Every side mirrors another. Every layer echoes the one below it. Repetition isn't failure here. It's reinforcement. The ancient builders trusted repetition more than originality. They weren't trying to invent something new. They were trying to stabilize something fragile. Human life, human memory, human fear of disappearing. The pyramids are what happens when fear is translated into geometry, not panic, control. Stacking certainty until uncertainty gets tired, and eventually, uncertainty did get tired. It wandered off, left the pyramids alone. You might notice now that there's no real difference between past and present in this space. The pyramids flatten time. Old feels recent, recent feels irrelevant. Everything blends into a long, continuous now. That's why it's so easy to lose track of where you are while thinking about them. They erase mental landmarks, which is useful late at night. Nothing needs to be placed. Nothing needs to be resolved. The pyramids don't care if you understand their chronology. They don't care if you mix up dynasties. They don't care if you forget names. They've already outlived accuracy. What remains is shape, mass, shadow. If you imagine them now, you might notice how simple they really are. No ornament, no movement, just four sides agreeing to meet. That agreement has held longer than most civilizations, which is oddly reassuring because it suggests that complexity isn't always necessary. Sometimes simplicity endures better. As this part drifts on, the story is doing what the pyramids do best, reducing, stripping away excess, leaving only what can remain without effort. If sleep comes now, it will come quietly. No fanfare, no conclusion, just a gradual fade. The pyramids are experts at fading without disappearing. They've been practicing for thousands of years. We'll keep going gently, through the spaces where thoughts become less important than presence. That's where the pyramids have always waited. All right, this is the part that feels like open space. No pressure to remember, no pressure to follow, just a long, wide mental horizon. The pyramids sit comfortably in wide spaces. They were never meant to be examined up close forever. They make more sense when you step back far enough that details stop mattering. From a distance, they're not monuments, they're anchors. They give the landscape something to organize itself around. Shadows fall predictably. Wind changes course slightly. The desert adjusts. That adjustment has been happening for thousands of years, very quietly. Nothing dramatic. The pyramids don't interrupt the environment. They slowly become part of it, which is probably the most successful outcome any human structure can hope for. If you think about it, the pyramids have already won, not against time, not against decay, against irrelevance. They could have vanished like so many other ancient things. Instead, they became background constants, and constants don't need defending. They don't need explanation. They just are. Your mind may be doing something similar now, letting go of specifics, holding on to sensation instead. Breath, weight, stillness. The pyramids exist in that same register. They're not stories anymore, they're conditions. Ancient Egyptians would have understood this instinctively. They didn't separate spirituality from environment. The desert, the sky, the river, all of it was one system. The pyramids weren't separate from that system, they were additions to it, stable ones, heavy ones. If you imagine the Nile flowing tonight, slow, steady, you can picture the pyramids watching it the way they always have, not observing, not judging, just being present nearby. That presence doesn't change the river. It doesn't need to. It just confirms that some things remain even as everything else moves. This is where the series naturally wants to rest. Not with the final thought, not with a summary, just with space. Space for sleep, space for drifting, space for nothing in particular. The pyramids don't close stories, they leave them open. So if this is where you stop listening, halfway through a sentence, halfway through a thought, that's perfectly appropriate. The pyramids have been halfway through time for a very long while. They're comfortable there. We'll leave them exactly as they like to be, standing, quiet, unbothered, and we'll let the rest fade out on its own. All right. We're still here. Or maybe we're barely here. Either one works. This part stretches out intentionally, not to add anything new, but to let everything already said lose its edges. The pyramids are very good at this. They don't sharpen ideas, they dull them gently. Imagine the desert just before dawn. That hour where the sky isn't dark anymore, but it's not bright either. Colors flatten. Depth becomes hard to judge. The pyramids sit in that light like they always do, unchanged, unimpressed by the transition. They don't mark beginnings or endings. They exist between them. 10 minutes to a pyramid is nothing. But it's a useful nothing. It's enough time for your thoughts to stop trying to be productive. Enough time for the brain to stop asking, what is this for? The pyramids never answer that question. They've outlived usefulness. And that's strangely freeing. Most things disappear when they stop being useful. Tools, ideas, even places. The pyramids crossed into a different category. They became unnecessary and survived anyway. That's rare. You can feel that rarity when you sit with them mentally for long enough. There's no transaction happening. They're not giving you insight. You're not giving them attention. It's just coexistence. Ancient Egyptians believed the universe worked best when things stayed in their proper place. The pyramids were attempts to fix something in place. Not movement, not life, presence. And they succeeded better than anyone expected. Your mind may drift now to unrelated things. Rooms you've been in, voices you half remember, moments without clear timelines. That's fine. The pyramids don't require focus. They're background safe. They don't collapse if ignored. In fact, they do better when they're not constantly examined. That's been true historically. Long periods of neglect were their safest years. No renovations, no theories, no crowds, just weather. Weather likes weather. Weather doesn't rush. As this part continues, notice how the pace never changes. No build-up, no payoff. That's intentional. The pyramids never escalate. They don't lead anywhere. They just occupy. Which is why they work so well at this stage of the night. They give your mind permission to stop progressing, to stop improving, to stop narrating itself. If sleep comes here, it won't feel like falling. It'll feel like settling. The pyramids don't fall asleep. They don't wake up. They just cycle through temperature and light. Over and over. That repetition smooths everything out eventually. Even mountains lose definition. Even pyramids will one day. But not tonight. Tonight they're exactly as they've been. Holding their shape. Holding their weight. Asking nothing. If this part feels longer than the others, that's not an accident. Time stretches when nothing happens. The pyramids understand this better than we do. They don't compress experience. They expand it by refusing to react. So let the next few minutes exist without expectation. You don't need to follow the words closely. They're not going anywhere important. Just like the pyramids. They'll still be there whether you're listening or not. And that's the comfort. 10 quiet minutes with something that doesn't need you can feel like rest. We'll stay here a little longer. No rush. The stone isn't moving.